My golden sister bankrupted our parents with her failed startup. I bought out all their debts. My name is Caitlin, and I'm 28 years old. If you think life's been cruel to you, just wait until you hear what I've been through. I grew up with an older sister, Amelia, now 31, who was the epitome of our parents' perfect child. They called her the golden child, and with good reason, at least in their eyes. To me, though, Amelia was like the real-life version of the Devil Wears Prada, except without Meryl Streep's style and that magnetic charisma. Amelia had this uncanny ability to get whatever she wanted, whether it was the last slice of pizza at dinner or the undivided adoration of our parents. It was as if the world conspired to fall at her feet. Physically, she was the classic image of perfection. Those blonde curls always seemed to bounce with an almost insulting vitality, and her bright blue eyes glistened with the sort of confidence that made people believe in her, even when they shouldn't. I was the stark contrast. Dark hair that refused to hold a curl, eyes as dark as midnight, and just as overlooked. Next to Amelia, I felt like a monochrome sketch that had been placed next to a full-color portrait. But here's the irony no one ever saw. That glamorous exterior was nothing more than a carefully curated shell. Beneath it was a relentless void, an insatiable hunger for attention and praise. Amelia knew how to play our parents like a symphony conductor guiding an orchestra, each movement orchestrated for maximum effect. Her manipulation was so seamless it bordered on art. So, when she revealed her brilliant startup idea, an app that would predict the flavor of your coffee based on your mood, it wasn't a hard sell. Our parents didn't just believe in her, they emptied their savings, as if investing in her idea would make them co-creators of some tech empire. And where was I? Sitting quietly in the background, watching their excitement with the detachment of someone waiting for a fireworks show to end in a soggy mess. Amelia's startup became the centerpiece of our household. Every conversation, every dinner, every phone call with relatives somehow circled back to her grand project. And why wouldn't it? Amelia was an expert at crafting narratives where she was the hero, the visionary. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, leveraging the gift of being invisible. Unlike Amelia, I didn't need applause to fuel my drive. In my tiny, cluttered home office, I worked tirelessly on my own projects. And by the time I turned 24, I had more digits in my bank account than Amelia's so-called innovative ideas could ever yield. It was a twist so rich with irony that I could have written a novel about it. Then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. Amelia's startup didn't just fail. It imploded spectacularly. The fall was so sudden that even the metaphorical rats on the ship couldn't jump off fast enough. Our parents, who had banked not only their money but their hopes on her success, were left in stunned silence. They looked as if someone had told them their precious coffee would never brew again. Amelia, true to form, took center stage with tear-streaked cheeks and trembling hands, weaving a tale of betrayal and misunderstood genius. "It was the investors. They just didn't understand my vision," she declared, voice breaking like an actress in a dramatic climax. "Sure, Amelia. It was definitely them." That's when it hit me. This was my moment. As I watched their world, built on nothing but blind faith and Amelia's relentless self-promotion, start to disintegrate, I knew it was time for me to step into the light. For the first time, the story was no longer about Amelia and her golden facade. It was about me, the overlooked sister who had learned that silence and shadows were the greatest powers of all. Their fragile illusion was breaking, and I was finally ready to show them what real success looked like. Our parents believed in Amelia's genius with such unwavering fervor that it felt as if we were trapped in a perpetual Broadway show titled Blind Faith, the Musical, staged right in our own living room. Every time Amelia spoke about her latest project, her eyes lit up with that familiar glint, and it was like a religious revival meeting had just begun. Dad sat up straighter, practically on the edge of his seat, ready to absorb every word as if it were scripture, while Mom would get that dreamy, far-off look, already seeing our family's name etched in the annals of history. Amelia's revolutionary ideas were as realistic as building a time machine out of a toaster, yet no one questioned her. No, when she threw around terms like innovation or expansion, Dad reached for the checkbook as if it were a reflex, and Mom's eyes would gleam with hope, probably picturing our faces on the cover of Forbes under some headline about the next tech dynasty. Expensive sofas and exotic plants are the first step to success, Amelia proclaimed one afternoon, as if she were reciting an age-old mantra of corporate excellence. I remember almost choking on my coffee at that statement. True to her words, the office she set up was a masterpiece of indulgence, the kind of place that looked straight out of a budget reality show about the rich and clueless. White leather furniture sprawled across the room like trophies. Tall potted palms stood as if guarding the entrance to her non-existent empire, and an enormous gold-framed mirror dominated one wall. I was pretty sure she spent a good portion of her time there perfecting her brilliant smile, an expression honed to look just right for investors, and maybe even the cleaning staff if they were lucky. But the most striking part of her grand office wasn't the glitz. It was the profound, oppressive silence. The kind of silence that clung to the air, heavy and foreboding, as if even echoes knew better than to stick around. A tomb-like silence, if that's not too dramatic. It was a space designed for success that had never truly known it. And our parents? They were blissfully unaware, their life savings evaporating quicker than snow in the California sun. The money that could have gone into retirement funds, a safety net for the future, or maybe even a share in my ambitions, was shoveled into Amelia's bottomless pit of promises. "It's for Amelia. She's leading us into a bright future," they would say, their voices tinged with that maddening, earnest belief. A bright future. The irony of that statement hit me like a punch every time I heard it. I stood by and watched, not just with resentment, but with a simmering, bitter satisfaction, as if I were perched on the edge of a cliff, waiting for them to finally peer down and realize that what lay ahead wasn't a golden path, but a steep fall. Over coffee with a friend one afternoon, I let out a long-held sigh, unable to keep my frustration bottled up any longer. "You know what amazes me most?" I said, my voice tinged with disbelief. "How can they worship someone so blindly when she can't even make a decent cup of tea?" The question hung in the air, a quiet testament to the absurdity of it all. The friend nodded, but the answer was clear. Amelia had mastered the art of illusion, and we were all just extras in her never-ending performance. The days stretched into weeks, and I watched as Amelia's so-called startup gobbled up resources faster than a vacuum in overdrive. New office decorations, strategy meetings that involved catered lunches from the most expensive restaurant in town, and business trips that were essentially vacations with a PowerPoint presentation thrown in. And each time she returned with the same excuses, "The market isn't ready," or "The investors are too conservative," our parents nodded sympathetically, their faith in her as solid as ever. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, my tiny home office a stark contrast to her opulent space, working hard and making steady gains. But to them, I was still invisible. The turning point was inevitable. The day came when Amelia's startup went under with all the subtlety of a ship hitting an iceberg. It wasn't a slow decline, it was a spectacular collapse. One moment, she was talking about expansions and new partnerships, and the next, the office was emptied of its leather sofas and palm trees faster than you could say, foreclosure. Our parents stood in stunned disbelief, like kids who'd just found out the tooth fairy wasn't real. Amelia put on the show of a lifetime, tears streaming down her face, voice quivering as she lamented the investors who just didn't see the vision. It was a performance worthy of an award, but this time, the applause didn't come. And as I stood in the midst of their crumbling world, watching their faith shatter along with their dreams, I realized that this was my moment. Amelia's glittering facade had finally cracked, and it was my turn to show them what real, quiet success looked like. Built not on empty promises, but on the invisible grit they never saw in me. 6 months after its flashy launch, Amelia's company became a financial black hole. Literally, her debts were so overwhelming that the office smelled more of fear and desperation than coffee and success. The shutdown was as inevitable as rain on graduation day, and Amelia, with her regal arrogance, didn't even realize the yacht of her dreams was sinking. The crash was spectacular. You know those scenes in movies where someone frantically tries to put out a fire they started? That was Amelia, flitting between financial statements and empty promises, trying to hide the scale of the disaster from our parents. But it all looked as flimsy as cardboard props disintegrating in the first rain. Her smile, once as radiant as Times Square lights, became a strained grimace. But our parents, they refused to see the obvious. They were like actors stuck in an endless play where they had to play the roles of the devoted fans until the bitter end. "She's just going through a rough patch," Mom assured, wiping away tears after another night of crying. Oh, sure, a rough patch. Like she broke a heel and not that her company was on the verge of bankruptcy. I couldn't stand by any longer and watch as my parents kept justifying every ridiculous move Amelia made. "Sweetheart, she's doing her best," Dad said, as if he didn't see that his golden child had drained their golden savings on luxury chairs and designer business cards. Something snapped inside me then. If they couldn't take off their rose-colored glasses, it was time for me to step in. I did some digging, like a detective in a low-budget movie, and discovered all her debts were with one bank. That bank was my treasure chest. I pictured myself holding her rough patch in my hands, ready to play the ultimate power move. The thrill of my plan was so satisfying it could have been bottled and sold as an energy drink. I contacted the bank holding Amelia's debts. The deal went so smoothly that even the bank clerk, who barely remembered my name, didn't question why I wanted those dying loans. I bought everything and savored the thought of the moment when Amelia would realize her creditor was me. Yes, it was like the plot of a cheap drama, but I couldn't resist. That evening, of course, our parents hosted a dinner filled with theatrics and desperate attempts to save their sinking ship, although everyone knew the water was up to their chins. The atmosphere at the table was tense, like a scene in an old gangster movie where everyone's waiting for someone to pull a gun. Mom wrung her hands, and Dad, with the solemnity of a politician at a rally, began, "Caitlin, your sister is going through hard times. We're sure you understand how important family support is during moments like this. Families should help each other." The classic line. That phrase was like a rusty nail hammered into my head every time Amelia came home with another story about how she accidentally spent our parents' money on a new project. I barely suppressed a smile. "You know, I've actually already helped," I said, raising my glass with an expression like I'd just won a sarcasm championship. My parents' eyes widened. Even Amelia, who sat with the air of an offended queen, leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" Dad pressed. "I bought all her debts, every last cent," I tossed out, enjoying how my words spread across the room like a shockwave. Amelia's mind visibly spun as she tried to process what I'd just said. The silence that followed was epic, like the climax of a thriller. When Amelia found out that I was now her creditor, her reaction was priceless. Imagine someone cutting the lights at her personal soap opera and announcing that the show was canceled forever. Her eyes widened like a sitcom character's, followed by a flood of tears and shrieks worthy of the Titanic finale. I half expected her to pull out a stage curtain and smack me with it for dramatic effect. How could you? This is betrayal!" she screamed, clutching her chest like she was going to faint. I knew this trick. Amelia used it whenever she needed attention, or more likely when someone forgot to compliment her outfit. Our parents stood by, looking like someone had just told them their perfect family was a sham. Dad stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, and Mom's mouth opened and closed, searching for words. It seemed they never suspected that their invisible daughter was capable of such a move. And you know what? I didn't care. I felt like the protagonist in a revenge movie where the villain finally gets what's coming. "Caitlin, you can't do this!" Amelia screeched, throwing words at me like knives. "I'm your sister, for God's sake!" "Sister?" I echoed with a sarcastic smile. "Funny, you only remembered that now? How convenient." She switched tactics, trying to play the victim, then threatening me as if her mind was running a game of rock, paper, scissors. She even whispered that if I dropped the debt, we could start fresh. Oh, sure, like I'd fall for that. "Amelia, save your dramatic monologues," I cut in. "I've waited too long for this moment. It's my turn to set the rules now." Amelia's debts grew so fast that it was like watching a blockbuster-level financial disaster unfold. When forged invoices and faked signatures surfaced among her papers, it all made sense. Our family's startup queen wasn't just a failure. She was a fraud. The moment of truth had arrived, and you know what? It was glorious. Our parents, it seemed, finally realized that their golden child was involved in a mess so deep that even a bank scanner would roll its eyes. They, like actors rehearsing a scene in a drama, began approaching me with timid requests. "Caitlin, dear, can we just talk this through? We know we haven't always been fair to you," Mom said, her voice dripping with sugary remorse I wouldn't have bought for a dime. They even promised me more attention and love that I'd never gotten all those years. Oh, how touching. But it was the same kind of love, hidden behind hollow looks and quick good jobs whenever I shared my achievements. No, thank you. "Wow, guys, that's so touching," I responded, nodding theatrically. "You must have forgotten that I'm an adult and don't believe in fairy tales anymore." Amelia, meanwhile, was losing everything. The company? Gone. Like steam over cold coffee. The respect of the family? Evaporated like a trendy kale chip diet. Friends? That was its own joke. All her loyal allies, who praised her non-existent business skills, vanished so fast that she couldn't even get out a wait, guys. Turns out friends who stick around only for perks tend to disappear when the money goes first. I stood back, watching her downfall like I was witnessing the best season of the most dramatic reality show ever made. And the best part? I no longer felt like the quiet girl they could overlook. I was someone they couldn't ignore. When Amelia was left alone, she finally understood that I had turned her downfall into the family's greatest lesson. Her golden glow that had captivated our parents dulled to nothing. She sat in my office, now a place of reckoning, looking at me as if I had become the villain of her drama. Honestly, I didn't mind. Minimal set, no grand gestures, just me, her, and a pile of papers that formalized my victory. "Well, dear sister, it's time to sign your future away," I said with a faux smile, handing her a pen. I knew demanding she sign the papers, committing to pay me back by working for minimum wage in my company, was the cherry on this massive cake of revenge. Not just any cake, but one that read, "Life is fair," in sarcasm-flavored icing. Her gaze, a mix of hatred and desperation, was priceless. She pressed her lips together as if ready to speak, but stayed silent, knowing any words would shatter against my confidence like waves on a rock. Slowly, as if in a movie scene where the camera lingers on every move, she signed the papers. Done. The final act of her story was sealed, and it was anything but a happy ending. Our parents watched from behind the glass partition, their expressions a mix of shock and realization that they had backed the wrong horse. Mom looked like someone had finally shaken her awake from a long sleep. And Dad? He just stared blankly, realizing their golden daughter was nothing more than tarnished foil. Life doesn't always hand out candy. Sometimes it's a cold shower, I said as Amelia rose, leaving her signature on each page. A mix of triumph and release filled me. My revenge had not only proven who the real winner was, but had freed me from the burdens of the past. Now that Amelia was working under my control, I felt as if I sat on the throne of my own small kingdom of vindication. A strange calm came over me, like a neon sign blinking on in my head that read, "You did it, Caitlin." Watching the golden daughter, once radiant as the star atop a Christmas tree, reduced to a shadow of her former self, was like watching a show where the villain finally gets what's coming to them. And that show would have shattered all viewer records. Each morning, Amelia came to work with the look of someone dragged in from the rain without an umbrella. Her perfect curls now seemed styled by a storm, and her clothes no longer screamed, "I'm a star." No, now they whispered, "I just want to survive the day." And you know what? I enjoyed the view with a peace that's hard to describe. It was the moment you realize you no longer have to prove your worth. My family, those same people who once looked at me through a lens of, well, she's just quiet, now understood that I wasn't just background to their golden child's success. I was the hero of my own story. And yes, that story included devastating blows. But not to me. To that false ideal they'd put on a pedestal. Time passed, and old wounds, the ones that burned inside me, making me feel overlooked and undervalued, began to fade, replaced by a sense of freedom. It was as satisfying as taking off tight shoes after a long day. At some point, I realized my power had never been about being prettier, louder, or more noticeable. True strength is resilience. It's the ability to rise when you've been pushed down for years, and not just rise, but do so with your head held high. And yes, I proved it.